Welcome to our August version of the book club. Today we're going to talk about The Obstacle is the Way. This was one of my more favorite books of all time. Why? Because it had a lot of great stories. And the one thing when you're kind of running a business that you kind of learn about strategy, you learn about tactics, you learn about marketing, you learn about accounting. The one thing that at business school and when I got my master's, it never taught me how do I react to a punch. What happens when something hits you that you're not expecting? And what I found was so great about this book was that it was like a bunch of arrows in a quiver for you to be able to handle circumstances that popped up when you were dealing with something. It wasn't something that was really about one certain topic. He went through so many different topics, and the chapters are very quick and easy to read. And so I loved it. I kind of like read a chapter at a time and let it soak in. But what I'm going to do here today is go through quickly about what the book's about and some things you can take away from it. And again, I want to follow up on the quiver and the arrows. And so when something happens to you, or things happen either through a person or events, what I find from this book is that you're able to go back and think about the situation you're in and then go find that precise arrow that will help you deal with the issue that's coming up. He broke down, the main thing about the book is the obstacle is the way, is that in life, I think he said like with breathing, is that you're going to have obstacles. You're going to have things that are going to use that famous Mike Tyson thing, everybody had a plan against them until they got punched in the face. Here at Mac 6, we get punched in the face probably about 2 or 3 times before it's 9 o'clock. So it's a lot of interesting things that go on. But here, he broke the book down into 3 different parts. And the first part is perception. How do you perceive the world, and how do you perceive what the problem is? The second thing is, then how do you go about taking action to deal with that problem? And then third is, what is your will to be able to follow through and do it? And again, there's a lot of great stories and a lot of different chapters that talk about this. And so what I'm going to do here is go through quickly through these 3 different sections. So when we meet again later in the month, we can talk about the things that spoke to you with this. So let's go through the first piece here is perception. To see and understand what is occurring around us. A lot of great stories about this. One of my first one is John Rockefeller. Probably at the time, and probably hasn't been passed yet, was probably one of the richest people in the history of the world. I think back when he was at his zenith, he was a billionaire when people were making like $1 a day. Just like the opulence of those guys. And what I found fascinating about this was that he started during an economic depression. And what he learned was, and the chapter talks about, is observing others and perceiving what's going on around you so you're able to see the opportunity. Because there's another chapter in the book that shows how many businesses were found during economic downturns. And so with perception is, as other people are losing their minds, he didn't. He saw the opportunity, and then he was able to move on it. And again, it's not easy in a stressful situation. And so, especially as business owners, sometimes there's going to be things that are going to turn up that you're not able to handle. And so you're going to learn, I think there are about 8 or 9, 10 chapters in the book for each one of these sections. But what was great about it was it wasn't like blah, 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 blah stuff. It started out with a story and then his thoughts on the story. And so you'll hear about Pericles, the great Athenian leader, that B-plus actor, George Clooney. I don't know if everybody is a fan of his. Tommy John, great story about Tommy John. He was a pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And in 1974, he had an elbow injury. And they said, "You'll never pitch again." And he went back and he said, "I don't want to accept that. I'm going to go back and try to find a way to be able to do that, to be able to pitch again. And so he went around, and there's a great story in the book about this where he goes to doctor to doctor to doctor, and they finally figure out a way to take a ligament from his other arm to put it on his pitching elbow. And they said, what are my chances? And he said, a 1 in 100. And he said, what are my chances without it? 0 in 100. And so he said, I'll take that chance for 1 in 100. And voila, I mean, you hear everybody right now, because they throw so hard, has Tommy John surgery. But he was somebody who went and took that chance, and he got punched in the mouth, taking the thing he loved the most, and he actually pitched for 27 years. Actually old enough to remember him pitching for the Dodgers. And then, of course, the great Steve Jobs is in there. The key thing about when you're reading this is diagnosing what a problem is. So you're kind of like a doctor in this thing. It's like, what's going on? Why is it going on? Because then you're able to kind of understand what's going on around you, and then go back to the next piece, is to understand what kind of action you're going to take to be able to get by this. And so the great thing about actions is it's directed actions. Everything must be done in service of the whole. And so it's one thing whenever you have a plan, it's how are you going to execute that plan, and how are you going to drive forward with getting this thing done. And so before, when you go back and you think about these things, is that something bad happens, what do I perceive what is happening, and then what kind of actions am I going to take? And then a couple great stories in this is that there was a great orator named Demosthenes. He was back in Athens by the time that Philip and Alexander took over, but he was trying to rally, and he was a real scrawny person. In the story that his family passed away, and the people that had his inheritance spent it all, so he had nothing. And so he went back and he said, I want to be able to create my body in a certain way. And so what he did was he went on the beach and he put pebbles in his mouth. And he would practice speaking, running up and down steps. And he would become like a great orator, because back in ancient times, there wasn't microphones. You had to stand out and project your voice. And he went back and he practiced, and he went back and he practiced, and he went back and he practiced. And he finally became a great orator, and he rallied Athens, to fight Philip at a certain point. But he became a great person just through sheer will and taking actions that would get him there. One of my favorite all-time biographies was when I read the biography of U.S. Grant. And he was always on the move, always about action. And he's always about taking the fight to the enemy. And, with action and things, is when something is going wrong, the one thing that's not going to solve the problem is doing nothing. And so the great thing about Grant that you learn about him is learning about how to react to things. Thomas Edison. There's a story in the next thing that jumps out in my mind, was that they came to his house and they said, kind of like, your warehouse is on fire. Everything they worked on. And one of the quotes that always stick out in my mind, he said to his kids, they said, stop and take a look. You'll never see a fire as glorious as this one. As everything burned up around them. But then within a year, they were back making the things and back making more money. And then Nick Saban, great chapter on him. The thing that he taught people was just do the next thing. He broke down everything they did at Alabama was, don't think about the SEC championship. Don't think about winning the national championship. Think about the next thing that you're doing. And that was one of the key things about action, is what is your next action you're going to take? And then finally, one of the most fascinating things was George Washington. This was a stat that completely blew my mind, was that they went through all the major military victors, like through world history, that they did an analysis on it. And I think it was only 2% took a direct attack at somebody. They're all flanking motions that attacked it from the side. Or they kind of, like in the Revolution, was Washington won because he didn't fight. He kind of just drug things along and then tried to wait it out, which they ended up doing. But a lot of times, when we take action, we think we have to be bold and we have to attack the problem head on. Sometimes you're not strong enough to do that. And part of this part about action is that what kind of action are you going to take, and really kind of assessing the situation. And so each one of these chapters takes through different things about how you make yourself stronger. And again, to arrows in the quiver, sometimes you think, I want to be bold and rush forward. Sometimes it might be saying, hey, I might have to sit here and wait this out a year or two until I can act again. And so there's a lot of great stories that go back and will educate you on action. And then finally, in order to do the action, you've got to have that strong sense of will. And then will is our internal power that can't be affected by the outside world. You know, it's one of those things that when you get up in the morning and you lay there and say, I don't feel like doing this today. You know, there's Megan's in here saying, I don't want to deal with this crap anymore. I want to go play golf. But you got to have the will to be able to do it. And there's a lot of great stories. You know, like with he went through, and the story about Ernest Hemingway just blew my mind. You know, there are a couple of things in my head. Like I think I said a couple of times, I'm lucky I have my head here because I'm reading these things. I said, I can't believe these things happened. Hemingway was a great author of the 20th century. And when he was first starting out, he was going over to Europe to share some of the things that he wrote, you know, with a publisher. And so he gave the bag to his girlfriend, and guess what the girlfriend did? She lost the bag and lost 3 years of writing. So he's over there and he has nothing now. And so, again, you know, the story ends up, he starts writing again and starts writing these different chapters and things, but he said it was kind of like something where it kind of freed his mind to be able to start new again. And so sometimes you can go back and you know, cry over spilt milk, but a certain thing is like, what are you going to do to be able to happen? Montaigne was a famous French writer, and the story about that was that he was thrown from a horse, and his friends thought they were bringing his corpse back because he was dead. And by the time he got back and they laid him down, he had this miraculous recovery. And everything he did in life was after that near fall that kind of changed his perspective in life and about how he then had the will to go out and do certain things. Theodore Roosevelt, when you think about Theodore Roosevelt, you think about the bull moose, the big, strong guy. When he was a kid, he was a little scrawny kid. And his dad went back and said, you have a strong mind, but you don't have a strong body. And he went back and he put a gymnasium in his house, and he spent 5 years working on his body to eventually make him to the person that he was today. And then finally, you know, James Stockdale, and being here in Arizona, we all know about John McCain. It tells a story about how he was the highest ranking person in the POW camp, and about how they took action and had will to be able to kind of get through those. And the thing about that was they were in those camps for 6, sometimes 7 years. I mean, it's one of the things to be able to get through the day to day. And so as you read the book, and when we get together again, and we'll have dates for this on the video, Megan, I'll have the date for you here, is that when you read it, is take time to kind of write down the 5 stories that spoke to you. I'm very curious to hear about how you could use some of these in your day-to-day business. And then finally is that let's have a great conversation about how you can put these things into action. And so if not, thanks for coming today, chomping on your salads and eating your lunch there. And we will meet again next month to talk about the obstacles of the way. Thanks, everybody.